Hey everyone, welcome back to our chapter read-through of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by JK Rowling. We are now on chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. But we need to first do a quick review before we get into the first half of this chapter. So if you want to pause and review what we've read so far with those who you're watching with this, if not, here goes my quick review. Harry Potter is the boy who lived. He is a wizard who, when he was a baby, survived being attacked by the darkest of dark evil wizards, Voldemort, or you know who. Now, sadly, his parents were killed by Voldemort, so he had to go and live with his Muggle family, non-magical family, the Dursleys, his aunt and uncle and cousin, who were awful. They were not nice to him, and when he finally got a letter from Hogwarts, which is a school for witchcraft and wizardry, they tried to keep him from going. Hagrid, who works at Hogwarts and is a giant, came and took Harry to go buy all of his things for school at Diagon Alley, and they went to Gringotts Wizard Bank as well. So, we just saw Harry get onto the Hogwarts Express on platform 9 3/4. He met some new friends, the Weasleys, who his friend Ron is the same age as him, and his brothers Percy, Fred, and George, and then Hermione Granger, who's another first year, and Neville Longbottom, as well as Draco Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle. So, our first years have just made it to Hogwarts, and we're going to see what comes next. Here it goes. Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. "The first year's Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fitted the whole of Dursley's house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly. But before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule-breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points will be awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" he asked Ron. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she'd learnt and wondering which one she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous. Never. Not even when he had had to take a school report home to the Dursleys, saying he'd somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead him to his doom. Then something happened which made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed, "What the—" He gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had started streaming through the back wall, pearly white and slightly transparent. They glided across the room, talking to each other and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." "My dear Friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, you know. He's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "New students," said the fat friar, smiling at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said the sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony is about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. "Now form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind the boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles, which were floating in mid-air over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. The tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table, where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here, so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, ghosts shone misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upwards and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't simply open to the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it? Harry thought wildly. That seemed the sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall, for I am the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can top them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see. So try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've ready a mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends, those cunning folk used by any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap. The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and then became quiet and still again. So we've just got to try on a hat? Ron whispered to Harry. I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he didn't wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted, she said. Abbott! Hannah! A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bones, Susan! Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat again, and Susan scudded off to sit next to Hannah. Boot, Terry! Ravenclaw! The table, second from the left, clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brockleburst, Mandy, went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown, Lavender, became the first new Gryffindor. At the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bulstrode, Millicent, then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination, after all he'd heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during sports lessons at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch Fletchley, Justin, Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the name at once, but the others it took a little while to decide. Then again, Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor! Shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages, until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there was obviously been a mistake, and he'd better get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted, Gryffindor! Neville ran off still wearing it, and had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to MacDonald Morag. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, "Slytherin!" Malfoy went to join his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Knot, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then at last, Potter, Harry. So that was the first half of Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. Let's dive into some discussion questions. All right. Who leads the first years up to wait for the sorting ceremony? Professor McGonagall. Now, this is actually the second time we've met her, right? She was waiting on Privet Drive the day that Voldemort attacked Harry and his family. But this is the first time, obviously, Harry remembers because he was a baby. What comes through the walls while they were waiting to go into the Great Hall? Do you remember? I'm going to get a picture up. It was the ghosts. Look at those ghosts. Get a good look. So there's a bunch of them. There's the friar, so he's like a monk. There's Nearly Headless Nick. A couple of others running through. Pretty spooky. Kind of scared the kids at first, didn't it? I bet even those who lived in wizarding families haven't seen ghosts. All right. What is the sorting ceremony? So Professor McGonagall explains it as them going through a little ceremony or kind of test to be put into houses. Now, why was Harry scared at first? Well, they didn't explain it, did they? He's like, do I have to do magic? What am I going to have to do in front of the whole school? I literally just got here. He was pretty scared. So what are the 4 houses of Hogwarts? And what do they kind of do? So I have this little banner back here. I'll finally kind of describe it. It's from the movies, the Harry Potter movies, and it is the Hogwarts crest. So it has the 4 houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. So those are our 4 houses. And how Professor McGonagall explains them is they will be like your family while you're here at Hogwarts. So they live together in a certain section of the castle. They can all earn points and win a prize at the end of the year. And you want to build up your family. Most of their friends will be in there, but of course they can have friends with other people, and they'll have a lot of classes together and then also mixed with the others. So that is what our houses are. Each of them have a very rich history at Hogwarts, and we'll learn about that sometime soon. Now, how does the Sorting Hat describe the houses? So he sings a little song, right? So what is something about Gryffindor that he says? I can't point and look backwards. So he says something about Gryffindor. He says, "There they dwell the brave at heart. Their daring and nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart." So they're brave and they'll do some things. They're bold people. They'll get out there and do stuff. Hufflepuffs are just and loyal. So they want what's right, and they're kind and take care. And they're unafraid of toil. So they'll also do things especially for their friends. Ravenclaws are wise and they love to learn. And they have a lot of wit. So they're very smart people. Slytherin are cunning. And so they are goal-oriented and they'll do things that they want to get done. All right, so those are our 4 houses of Hogwarts. Why do you think the chapter was called The Sorting Hat? Oh, it's kind of important, right? That's how they learn what house they're going to go into. And we read about almost all of them go through the sorting ceremony, and we'll see what happens with Harry's sorting next video when we finish Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat, from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. See you next time. Bye!